I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands flat against my knees, the way my mother used to sit when she was waiting for bad news. The hallway light cut a thin yellow line under the door. On the other side of that door, my son and his wife were still talking, and I had heard enough to know my life had just changed. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember because I had baked an apple cake that afternoon, and the kitchen still smelled like cinnamon when I came upstairs to get a sweater. I'm 74 years old. I taught 3rd grade in Cleveland for 31 years. I raised one son, mostly on my own, after my husband died of a heart attack at 46. I am not a dramatic woman. I have never raised my voice in a parking lot or made a scene at a restaurant. So when I tell you that I sat on that bed and felt my hands go cold, I want you to understand it wasn't theatrics. It was the kind of stillness that comes when your body knows something before your mind does. What I had heard, standing in the upstairs hallway with one hand on the linen closet, was my daughter-in-law saying, "The placement coordinator can come Thursday. We just need her to sign the consent on Wednesday. After that, it's done." And my son, my only child, the boy I had taught to tie his shoes on the back step of our duplex in Lakewood, said, "She'll sign. She trusts me. She'll sign. She trusts me." I want to be honest about what happened in my chest in that moment. It wasn't rage. Rage came later, and it came slow, the way a bruise comes up. What I felt first was something closer to embarrassment that I had been so easy, that I had handed over the house, signed the papers in May without reading them, deposited the check from the sale into a joint account, because my son said it was simpler that way, and moved into their guest room with my mother's quilt and a box of photo albums and a feeling that I was being a good mother by making things easier for my child. $410,000, that was what the house in Lakewood sold for. Not a fortune, but it was mine. My husband Daniel and I had bought it in 1978 for $42,000, and I had paid off the last of the mortgage the year I turned 60. I had a pension from the school district, a small one, and Social Security, and the proceeds from the house. I was not rich, but I was fine. I was supposed to be fine. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I made myself breathe. 3 counts in, 4 counts out, the way I used to teach my 3rd graders before a spelling test. I looked around the room, the guest room. They had let me bring a few things, my quilt, 2 lamps, the small oak dresser that had belonged to my mother. The rest of my furniture had gone to an estate sale that my daughter-in-law had arranged, very efficiently, in a single weekend. I thought about what I knew. I knew my son had asked me 3 weeks earlier if I had been feeling forgetful. I had said no because I hadn't. He had asked again the following week after I left the gas burner on for about 20 seconds before catching it myself. He had mentioned it twice at dinner. My daughter-in-law had said gently, the way you talk to a child, that there was a wonderful place out in the county with a garden where his mother and aunt had stayed before they passed. His mother, his aunt. Both of them had been put there after strokes. Neither one of them had walked out. I thought about the consent form. I tried to remember if I had seen any papers on the kitchen counter recently. There had been a folder. A blue folder. My daughter-in-law had moved it when I came into the kitchen on Sunday, and she had smiled and said it was just insurance paperwork. I am not a stupid woman. I want that on the record. I am the woman who handled the entire estate when Daniel died, the woman who fought the school district for a wrongful demotion in 1994 and won, the woman who knew enough to insist on a prenup when my sister got remarried to a man none of us trusted, but I had let my guard down because he was my son. I had taught him to read. I had stayed up with him through chickenpox and broken arms. I had paid for his college because Daniel's life insurance had been just enough, and I had eaten a lot of canned soup so he wouldn't have to take loans. Somewhere in the back of my throat, I felt a sound trying to come up, and I swallowed it down. There would be no crying. Not in this house. Not tonight. I got up. I moved slowly, the way you move at night when you don't want to wake anyone. I went to the closet and pulled out the soft canvas tote bag I used for the farmer's market. Into it I put my prescription bottles, all 4 of them, from the bathroom, my reading glasses, the small navy blue address book I had kept since 1982, my Social Security card and Medicare card from the envelope in the dresser, my passport, which I had renewed 2 years ago for a trip with my friend Rosalind that never happened because she got sick, and the envelope of cash I kept inside the cover of an old Reader's Digest condensed book on the top shelf of the closet. $1,800. I had been putting 20 here, 50 there, for almost a year without knowing why. Now I knew why. I took my mother's quilt off the bed and folded it small. I put it in a second bag. I left the photo albums. I almost cried over that, but I left them. They were heavy, and I needed to move fast. I sat back down on the bed, and I wrote 2 checks to myself out of the joint account, each for the maximum the bank would clear without a hold, which I happened to know was $2,500, because my husband had taught me about banks the year before he died. I wrote them carefully, and I dated them for the next day. I put the checkbook back in the dresser exactly where I had found it. Then I sat and I listened. The house got quiet around 11:30. My son's bedroom door clicked shut. I waited another 40 minutes by the alarm clock on the dresser. Then I picked up my bags and my shoes, and I went down the carpeted stairs in my socks, one hand on the banister, the way I used to come down on Christmas morning when I was a child, trying not to wake my parents. In the kitchen, the blue folder was on the counter. My daughter-in-law had been working on something at the table earlier and hadn't put it away. I opened it. There was the consent form. There was a brochure for a memory care facility in Medina County. There was a printout of a doctor's note from someone I had never been to, claiming I had been showing signs of cognitive decline since the spring. There was, God help me, a power of attorney document, already signed in what appeared to be my handwriting, dated 3 weeks earlier. I had not signed that document. I had never seen that document. I took everything in the folder. I put it inside my tote, between the quilt and the prescription bottles. I left the folder itself on the counter, empty, exactly where it had been. I walked out the front door at 1:15 in the morning. I closed it without locking it, because the deadbolt makes a sound when you turn it, and I did not want to wake anyone. The October air was cold and smelled like wet leaves. I walked 4 blocks to the gas station on Northfield Road, and I called a taxi from the payphone outside the bathrooms. The driver, a young man with a thick beard, did not ask me any questions when I said I needed to go to the bus station downtown. The Greyhound to Pittsburgh left at 4:10 a.m. I bought a ticket with cash. I sat in the waiting area with my tote on my lap, and I did not let myself fall asleep because I was afraid I would wake up and find that I had imagined the whole thing. I did not go to Pittsburgh. I had a friend named Geraldine. She and I had taught together at Sunbeam Elementary for 14 years before she retired and moved to a small town in central Pennsylvania to be near her sister. She lived in a place called Millerton, population about 1900, and we had not spoken in almost 8 years, not for any bad reason. Just life. Christmas cards for a while, then nothing. I had her old address in my navy blue book, and I had a feeling, I cannot explain it any other way, that she was still there. In Pittsburgh, I changed buses. I took a smaller bus, a regional line, and I rode for 3 more hours through hills that were already turning red and gold. I got off in a town called Coudersport, and I took a taxi the last 22 miles to Millerton, and I paid the driver in cash and asked him to leave me at the corner of Maple and 2nd. Geraldine's house was the 3rd one down. White clapboard, a red door, a wind chime made of old spoons hanging from the porch, I stood at the foot of his steps for a full minute before I could make myself climb them. I was 74 years old, and I had just run away from home with a tote bag and a quilt, and I was about to knock on the door of a woman I hadn't called in almost a decade and ask her to take me in. She opened the door in a blue cardigan with her hair the same silvery color it had been in 2016. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, honey," and she did not ask a single question. She took my tote bag and she put it on the bench in her entryway, and she walked me to her kitchen and she sat me down at her table, and she made me a cup of strong tea with milk and sugar. After I had finished half the cup, she said, "What happened?" I told her, "Not all of it, just enough." She nodded the whole time, and when I got to the part about the power of attorney with the forged signature, she stopped me. She said, "We need to talk to my nephew." Her nephew, it turned out, was an attorney in a town 20 minutes away. He specialized in elder law. He had been doing it for 16 years. I slept that night in Geraldine's spare room, in a bed with a pink chenille bedspread, and I slept for 11 hours. The next morning, Geraldine drove me to her nephew's office. His name was Mr. Nell Holcomb, and he was in his late 40s, with a kind, serious face and a wedding band that looked old. I spread the contents of the blue folder out on his desk. He looked at each document for a long time. Then he took out a yellow legal pad and he started writing. He asked me if I had signed the power of attorney. I said no. He asked me if I had ever been examined by the doctor whose name was on the cognitive decline note. I said no. I had been going to the same internist in Lakewood for 19 years, a Dr. Pam, whose name was not on this document. He asked me where the proceeds from the house sale had gone. I told him about the joint account. He asked me who else was on that account. I told him my son and his wife. He set down his pen. He looked at me. He said, "Mom, I'm going to be honest with you. What you've described is several different crimes. Forgery of a power of attorney is a felony in Ohio. Filing a fraudulent medical document is a felony. Conspiracy to commit involuntary commitment of a competent adult is a serious matter. The money in that joint account, depending on how the deposit was structured, may also be recoverable under elder financial exploitation statutes." I asked him what I should do. He said, "First, we open you a new bank account, here in Pennsylvania, in your name only. Then we transfer what we can from the joint account today, before they realize you're gone. Then we revoke the power of attorney they forged, formally, in writing, with a copy to every financial institution it may have been presented to. Then we wait." I asked him what we were waiting for. He said, "We're waiting to see what they do next." That afternoon, we went to a credit union in his town. I opened an account. I wrote the two $2,500 checks I had prepared the night before, and they cleared by the end of the day, because the joint account hadn't yet been flagged. The next morning, I went back, and I transferred another $15,000 by wire, the maximum the credit union would do in a day for a new account. I kept doing this every day for a week. By the following Tuesday, I had moved $146,000 out of the joint account and into my own. I did not move all of it. I left $50,000 behind. Mr. Holcomb suggested this. He said, if they call the bank and find the account empty, they'll panic and they'll act fast. If they find it mostly there, they'll assume you're confused or that something glitched, and they'll take their time figuring out what to do. The slower they move, the better for us. He was right. It took my son 9 days to figure out I was gone. 9 days. I had been part of his household, eating his meals, watching television in the living room, baking apple cakes, and it took him 9 days to notice I had walked out the door. When he did notice, he called the police in Lakewood and reported me missing. The police, very properly, asked him a number of questions, and very quickly determined that I had left of my own accord with my own belongings, and that I was a competent adult, and they declined to do anything. They did, however, mention to my son that they would be filing a routine welfare report, and they asked him for the name of my doctor and the location of any recent medical evaluations. My son gave them Dr. Pham's name. He could not produce the cognitive decline report from the other doctor because the cognitive decline report was sitting in Mr. Holcomb's filing cabinet along with the rest of the blue folder. This is when things started to move. Mr. Holcomb sent a certified letter to my son and his wife. The letter was 4 pages long. It informed them that the power of attorney they had been operating under was a forgery, that this had been verified by a handwriting expert in Pittsburgh, that the medical evaluation they had used to begin the commitment process appeared to have been fabricated by someone who was not the doctor named on the letterhead, and that I had retained counsel and was prepared to pursue both civil recovery of misappropriated funds and to assist any criminal investigation that might result from a referral to the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. The letter did not threaten. It did not editorialize. It simply laid out the facts and gave them 14 days to respond. In the meantime, I kept my head down. I lived in Geraldine's spare room. I helped her with her garden, which was getting ready for winter. I started walking to the small public library 4 blocks away, where I volunteered 3 afternoons a week, shelving books and reading to a children's story hour on Wednesdays. I used my maiden name on the volunteer roster, not because I thought my son was looking for me, I didn't think he would dare, but because I wanted, for the first time in many years, to be a person who was not somebody's mother or somebody's widow. The 14 days passed. On the 15th day, Mr. Past, Holcomb received a letter from an attorney in Cleveland representing my son. The letter was 3 sentences long. It said that my son denied any wrongdoing, that he was concerned for my welfare and believed I had been unduly influenced by an outside party, and that he reserved all rights. Mr. Time. Holcomb laughed when he read it to me over the phone. He said, "Ma'am, in 16 years, that is the weakest reply letter I have ever received." He sent a second letter. This one was shorter than the first, and it attached 3 things. The first was a copy of the handwriting analysis. The second was an affidavit from Dr. Pham, my actual physician, dated the previous week, stating that he had examined me and found me cognitively intact, oriented, and possessing full legal capacity. The third was a copy of a complaint that had been drafted but not yet filed, with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Elder Fraud Unit. The letter said, "Our client has no interest in pursuing criminal prosecution if the following conditions are met within 30 days. It then listed 4 conditions: the return of all funds that had been removed from the joint account since May, with interest; a signed, notarized acknowledgement that the power of attorney was a forgery and was hereby revoked; a signed agreement that neither my son nor his wife would attempt to contact me, directly or through intermediaries, for any reason; and, finally, the return of certain personal items that I had left behind, specifically my photo albums and my husband's wedding ring, which I had stored in the bottom drawer of the dresser in the guest room. It took them 11 days to comply. The money came back in 2 transfers, $234,000, which together with the $146 I had already moved, made me almost whole. Almost, not quite. There were $60,000 I never saw again, and I have made my peace with that. I think of it as the tuition I paid to learn a lesson I should not have had to learn. The notarized acknowledgments came by certified mail. I read them in Geraldine's kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand. They were dry, legal things, but they amounted, in plain English, to a written confession. The photo albums came in a cardboard box. My husband's ring was in a small velvet pouch on top of the albums, exactly where I had left it. There was no note. I have not spoken to my son since the night I walked out. That was 19 months ago. I want to say something about that, because I know it will be the part people ask about. People will say, "But he's your son." People will say, "Family is family." People will say, "You only get one." I've heard all of these things, mostly from people who have not had a family member try to put them away for money. What I will say is this: I did not press criminal charges. I could have. Mr. Holcomb told me more than once that I had a case. I did not file. Not because my son deserved mercy. He didn't, not really, but because pressing charges would have meant years of my life in courtrooms and depositions, reliving the worst night I have ever lived through, and I am 74 years old. And I have decided that the time I have left is going to be mine. So instead I did what an old friend of mine used to call the quiet thing. I took back what was mine. I made sure they could never do it again. And I walked away. Not from family. There was no family to walk away from. I walked away from people who had decided I was worth more dead than alive. And I refused to let them have either version of me. I live in a small apartment in Millerton now, above a bakery on the main street. I can smell the bread coming up through the floor at 5 in the morning, and I don't mind it. I have my own bank account. I have a will drafted by Mr. Holcomb that leaves what I have to a scholarship fund at Sunbeam Elementary, where I taught for 31 years, and to Geraldine, who took me in without asking a single question on a cold October morning, and to a children's literacy charity in Pittsburgh that I picked out myself. I do not have my son in my will. I do not have him in my address book anymore either. There is one more part of this story, and I want to tell it because it is the part that matters most to me, and I think it is the part that will matter to anyone listening who has been through something similar. About 6 months after I left, a young man in his early 20s found me. His name is my grandson. He drove from Cleveland on a Saturday in March, and he sat in Geraldine's kitchen, and he cried for a long time. He told me he had not known. He told me his mother had said I had moved into a memory care facility in Florida, and that I had asked them not to visit because I didn't want anyone to see me decline. He told me he had believed it, and he had been ashamed of himself for believing it, and he had only found out the truth because he had overheard his mother on the phone with an attorney. I made him a cup of tea, I let him cry, and then I told him the whole story, beginning to end exactly the way I have told it to you. He visits once a month now. He is studying to be a nurse. He is a kind young man, and he was raised, mostly, by my late husband and me, in the summers when he came to stay. I see his grandfather in him, in the careful way he holds a cup, in the way he listens before he speaks. He has not spoken to his father in over a year. That was his choice, not mine. I have never asked him to choose. I would not. I want to end with something that has taken me a long time to be able to say. When I sat on the edge of that bed in the dark, with my hands flat against my knees, I thought that what was happening was the worst night of my life. I thought it was an ending. I thought that the rest of my years, however many were left, would be a long, quiet sadness over the son I had lost. That has not been what happened. What happened was that I found out, very late and very painfully, who I actually was. I was not a soft old woman who needed her son to take care of her. I was a woman who had taught 3rd grade for 31 years, and balanced a household on a teacher's salary and a widow's grief. And I had a navy blue address book full of women who would open their doors to me in the middle of the night. And I had enough sense, at 1 in the morning, to read the contents of a folder on the kitchen counter and understand exactly what was in it. That is who I was. That is who I am, and nobody, not even my own child, gets to decide otherwise. If you are listening to this, and you are tired, and you are scared, and you have started to wonder whether the people around you are who you thought they were, I want you to hear me. Trust the cold feeling in your hands. Trust the small voice that says something is wrong. Pack the bag. Make the call. There are women like Geraldine in the world, more of them than you think, and there are men like Mr. Holcomb, And there are grandsons who will drive 300 miles to sit in your kitchen and tell you the truth. You are not too old to start over. I was 74 when I walked out the door with a tote bag and a quilt. I am 76 this fall, and I have a life that is entirely my own, and I would not trade a single morning of it for anything I left behind. That is the whole story. Thank you for letting me tell it. I have thought a great deal, in the months since that October night, about how a person ends up sitting on the edge of a bed in the dark at 74 years old, listening to her only child plan her disappearance. I do not believe it happens all at once. I think it happens the way a hairline crack runs through a coffee cup. Slowly, over years, every time you tell yourself that what you saw was not really what you saw. The truth is, I had been making myself smaller for a long time before that night. I had agreed to the joint account because asking questions felt rude. I had let my furniture go to an estate sale because making a fuss felt selfish. I had laughed off the comments about my memory because contradicting my son felt unloving. Each of those small surrenders looked like kindness from the outside. From the inside, they were the rungs of a ladder I was helping other people build, one I would eventually be pushed off of. What saved me was not luck. I want to be clear about that, because I think women my age have been told for too long that the women who get out are the lucky ones, and the women who don't are simply unfortunate. That is not true. What saved me was 31 years of standing in front of third graders and learning to notice when something was wrong before anyone said a word. What saved me was an envelope of cash I had been quietly setting aside without knowing why, and a navy blue address book I had kept current out of respect for the women in it. What saved me was the part of myself I had not allowed my son and his wife to talk me out of yet. There is a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with degrees or cleverness. It is the intelligence of paying attention, of reading the room, of opening the blue folder on the kitchen counter at 1 in the morning instead of telling yourself it would be impolite. I had that intelligence my whole life. I had simply stopped trusting it, and there is a kind of strength that is not loud. I did not scream at my son. I did not throw anything. I walked down a carpeted staircase in my socks, and I closed a door without locking it, and I sat in a bus station for 2 hours with a tote bag on my lap. That was the strength. The quiet refusal to let other people write the ending of my life. I think about Geraldine sometimes, opening her red door in a blue cardigan and asking no questions. I think about Mr. Holcombe writing on his yellow legal pad. I think about my grandson driving 300 miles to sit in a kitchen and tell the truth. None of them owed me anything. All of them showed up because, somewhere along the way, I had been the kind of person who deserved to be shown up for. That is the law I have come to live by. What you put into the world has a way of waiting for you. Be honest when it costs you something. Keep the friendships that don't pay you back. Notice the small wrongs before they become large ones. And when the cold feeling comes into your hands at 1 in the morning, do not argue with it. Pack the bag.